students were often coming into the classroom with a model of attention is a bucket, and I have the right to fill it up. If a faculty member is talking and I find what they're saying boring, I also get to look at Facebook on my phone, or I get to go shopping on my laptop or whatever. And I keep telling students, attention isn't a bucket, it's a sphere. It's something you aim, not something you fill. If just accessing information was what education was for, we wouldn't just have been killed by YouTube. We would have been killed by the printing press. Metacognition. I'm thinking about whether these things go together. I'm thinking about how the text and the video should inform one another. You can build an assignment around that. But, and I think the key difference between just trying to outrun the tool versus building an assignment around complex integration, we still need assessment practices that tell us whether the students have done that.
Today's guest is Shirky from NYU, where he serves as the Vice Provost of Artificial Intelligence and Technology in Education.
Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, he was a guest in my classroom way back in 2009 at the University of Wisconsin, where he was very generous with his time to speak to my class then. And he's always been very generous with his time in that degree, and also always been, as far back as I can remember, one of the leading thinkers on, at that time we called new media, but let's just say like media and technology and how it relates to culture, society. And now him with this prestigious job at NYU makes perfect sense. And I think NYU is really lucky to have someone of his stature in terms of his fluency on these topics. And we asked him to be a guest on this podcast specifically because we were interested in unpacking his provocative opinion piece in the New York Times,
right?
Which has about 1,500 comments.
Oh, wow.
And it really touched a nerve. And that particular essay has a provocative thesis, which is essentially that we need to go back to the Middle Ages in terms of instruction and assessment. And I think what he's really getting at, and we'll discuss this with him, is that we need to be more clear about what is the actual product of education, what are we actually hoping to achieve, right. And how can we kind of strip away all the cybernetic equipment and augmentations from the students so that we can actually find out what they really know.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to be part of your second conversation with him years later. And I'm really interested to know more about his take on resorting to medieval times in higher education assessment.
We want to kick things off by digging into your provocative claim, Clay, in which you kind of argue that we need to go back to the Middle Ages. In the medieval model of learning, so much depended on sustained attention. Long lectures read aloud. I think you call it viva voce exams, which I believe is kind of oral exams, yes? The discipline of being fully present. So do you think there's something authentic in that slower, less distracted mode of education, even in the boredom that it demanded, that we have lost?
Yeah, so I think the word authentic is interesting because there is this now modern conception of authentic assessment, which is to say, when you ask a student to learn something, the way to see if they've learned it is to ask them to use the knowledge in some way, to take on an authentic task. And the point I was trying to make in the referring to medieval education is really to get people to understand that our current practices around written work, student assignments, all of that, all of those are adaptive responses. They make sense made sense in a pre-ChatGPT climate, but they were not always how we did things. We have our institutional form has a nearly 1,000-year history, and faculty often believe we have always done things this way. When in fact, in particular, the rise of original student writing is a relatively recent adaptation. One of the things I learned just in doing the reading and research on the way to that piece was Oxford and Cambridge, the universities on which most early American colleges were modeled, didn't really seriously invest in written tests until half a millennium after they were founded, right? 500 years of a mainly oral culture of examination and instruction. Reading has been central to the academy and to academic work since the inception, but writing has not been. And so getting people to understand there have over this long history of running these institutions, there have been lots and lots of ways of telling whether or not a student knows something. And it doesn't have to be a written assignment. The authenticity really, I think, is the point we're turning back towards, right? If a student's output is no longer a guarantee of the student's experience, then it's entirely possible for me to get inauthentic writing from a student, right? That I ask, if I'm teaching a history class and I ask for a history of, new technologies in the Crimean War, something like that, you can generate a perfectly good essay with these tools while internalizing nothing about even where Crimea is, who the combatants were, which the new technologies were. I might enjoy reading it, but that has not created in the student's brain any particular experience. And so, to your point of attention and boredom, which was something we were already dealing with, students were often coming into the classroom with a model of attention is a bucket, and I have the right to fill it up, right? If a faculty member is talking and I find what they're saying boring, I also get to look at Facebook on my phone, or I get to go shopping on my laptop or what have you. And I keep telling students, and again, we were fighting this battle long before ChatGPT, attention isn't a bucket, it's a spear. It's something you aim, not something you fill. And we have to fight the model that says everything has to be completely engaging all the time in order to be worth your time. Because of where I taught, many of my former students went to work at Facebook, and I knew how good they were. And I will tell you, if I'm trying to talk to you about the Crimean War and Facebook is trying to tell you what your friends were doing last night, I know which is more interesting. I can't compete with that. And I'm perfectly willing to say I will never be as interesting as news of your friend group. But I shouldn't have to compete with that. I'm doing a different thing. And what ChatGPT is now introduced into that equation, and then downstream of that, all of the other large language models and diffusion models, is the ability for a student to turn in something to me that is inauthentic in terms of their experience. And once you understand that point about authenticity, Spencer, I think that a bunch of other stuff becomes clear downstream of that. I am not grading ChatGPT. There's
right.
no point in my grading ChatGPT.
Right, exactly.
They're not taking in any of my input. And me assigning a grade to something produced by ChatGPT but turned in by a student doesn't benefit my student either. A lot of this has been framed, and I'm sure you've seen this there as well. A lot of this has been framed in the outside world as a kind of kids today, academic integrity. Why doesn't anybody, have any morals anymore? Kind of hand-wringing, a kind of moral panic. I want to be on our students' side and say they've been given a tool that offers a really appealing shortcut, is endlessly persuasive, and flatters them, right? The output of these tools is always, oh, that's such a good question. You're so brilliant. Nobody's ever thought of that before. Just constant inbound flattery. It is tough for a student to say no to that. And I'm much more worried about the tools basically persuading students that this is a valuable way to learn than the students intentionally trying to cheat. And the turn towards the medieval model of attention and focus and interaction, verbal exams, is a way of saying this is a human enterprise. if this is what it takes to reintroduce the human element to instruction, this is what we should be doing.
That's an amazing take. Now, another thing that you've said, which I think really hits it directly, is that the product of education is actually changes in long-term memory. And you could argue that what ChatGPT has done is kind of exposed the weakness of the essay or the take-home essay, its flaws as a tool. And so can we kind of get into that a little bit? What is what's supposed to be the product of education, and how does that also connect to your, what you've said here about identity formation?
I'll start with the identity formation, because that in a way is that's the statement of purpose around being a human institution, right? The output of a history class, the important output of a history class is not history papers. The important output of a history class is historians, right? That we're giving students exercises in order to help them become new kinds of people. It isn't just a set of skills or information. I mean, frankly, as I also say in the essay, if just accessing information was what education was for, we wouldn't just have been killed by YouTube. We would have been killed by the printing press, right? Every time there's better access to information, you'll get some group of people saying, oh my God, this is the end of higher ed, as if what we're doing is just transferring facts.
That's a good point, yeah.
We're helping students become the kind of people they want to be. Some of that is professional self-definition. I am a historian, I am a biologist, whatever. But one of the absolutely clear effects of higher education, validated by the research over decades, is that when people go through a degree program, they get all kinds of incredible life outcomes. They live longer. They tend to be happier. They're more likely to be in intact families. Like all of these things that have nothing to do with, I was in some history classes and I wrote some papers. There is this change in identity when you go through what it is we're capable of walking a student through. In my view, that's the thing worth defending. I think that the people who are in pursuit of efficiency often want us to work like a factory, and we don't. And so we have to think about what it is we care about. And I think, one of the big realignments is going to faculty who were never themselves taught to teach, right? I went and got a degree in something and I learned the content of that degree, but I'm just going to teach the way I was taught in school because it's the only model I have. We're now at a place where we're having to reinvent that without having had a lot of formal training in it. But for me, the base case is exactly what you said. Learning is a change in long-term memory. To the degree that an assignment gives students experiences they learn from, it's a good assignment. To the degree an assignment can be bypassed by a tool that is specifically designed to require less thinking, like that's not a side effect of AI. That's what AI does. Right. That's what makes it valuable. It's a bad assignment. And so we have taken it for granted that an assignment is a proxy for student experience for so long that it's difficult to now look around and say, yeah, I got a nicely written paper from a student, and I have no idea if they've learned any of the facts in it. I can't grade the paper as a proxy for grading the student. And it's the students we care about. So I think we're all now facing this turn towards more look me in my eye and tell me about the Crimean War kind of thing. Yeah. Because frankly, a student could produce all the output in the world. It could even be world class. If they haven't internalized it, they have what they've learned is how to use, cut and paste. They haven't learned how to think about the subject of the class.
Just from your experience, how do students feel about this shift, like with the rapid changes, that are taking place with AI tools in education, and then faculty and programs trying to keep up with that and implementing policies and rules in their syllabi. How do students feel about that on the other side?
So the huge surprise for me, and I will say the single biggest change in the way I've been thinking about it in the last 3 years, I used to think that student use of AI was on a spectrum. There were bad uses and good uses, lazy uses and engaged uses, whatever labels for the ends of the spectrum you want to have. And without even noticing it, by putting it on a spectrum, I assumed that if we got students to adopt the good uses, it would also pull them away from the bad uses. That effectively getting them to eat carrots would crowd out the potato chips kind of thing. And then it turned out that we actually have several populations of students. There's one population that won't touch the tools under any circumstances. Either they're worried about being accused of not doing their own work, or they came to do the work by hand as previous generation done, whatever. There's a group of students that only use it as tools to help learning. That group, frankly, is relatively small, but that group is there. They voluntarily self-restrict useful use of tools. There are people who cheat. There have always been people who've tried to cheat. Now they're cheating with AI. It's a drag, but they're only going for the sort of lazy, shortcutty uses. But the group I wasn't ready for were the omnivorous students, the students who use it for everything. And those are the students where if you introduce them to the good uses, they're like, okay, this is great. I can make flashcards. I can study for a test, and also will engage in the lazy uses. So this is all by way of saying, I can't answer your questions as how do students feel, because each of those populations is in a somewhat different alignment. For the students who are just enrolled in order to get a degree and don't much care about the content of their classes, that they feel like they're checking a box, they've been given a shortcut so that they can check the box without a lot of work, and they're annoyed at having it taken away, right? For the students who either are not using the tool at all or only using it in engaged ways, these new forms of assessment that say we care about what you learn can sometimes come across as a relief. Like, oh, thank goodness, this is in line with what I was thinking anyway.
Yeah.
The complicated group is the omnivorous students because they're simultaneously annoyed and engaged, as it were. And one of the common things we're hearing, and this is true when faculty set up device-free classrooms too, which is, oh, this is annoying. Why do I have to put my phone in this special box? This is stupid. And we often hear from faculty 3 or 4 weeks into the semester, oh, this is really good. Like, I didn't think that this was going to make as much difference as I thought. I didn't realize how often I looked at my phone. I was just talking to a friend who was telling a story of, because of the seating chart, she was right near the professor in a particular class, and so was worried about having her laptop open because sometimes she would tab away to go look at Etsy or whatever. So she thought, well, just to get through this class, I'm going to take notes on paper. And then she realized, I'm learning so much more in this class when I shut my laptop and I'm just paying attention. And sometimes it's boring. And if in that flick moment of boredom, it's like, oh, I'm going to go over to Instagram and, look at pictures of sunsets or whatever. You don't do that. You actually get way more out of the class. And she reported a certain amount of embarrassment of obviously in retrospect, if you're paying better attention, you're learning more. But it took that weird change in the seating chart to get her to shift to paper notes. And then she said she stuck with paper notes for the rest of her career because that was the thing that was helping the learning. There, in American systems, this may be a little bit different there. In American systems, there has been a 50-year move away from the faculty member as an authority figure. Okay. Right. The commonly repeated stages, we're moving away from the sage on the stage. Now we have the guide on the side, right? And this nostrum is repeated endlessly. Yeah. And one of the things that I think the devices in the classroom question has a similar effect is we're the authority figures. It's just part of the job. You can't get out from under it. And it makes American faculty often uncomfortable to say that. you were doing this because I told you to, and I'm confident if you do what I tell you to, you'll learn. And yet that's what a syllabus is. A syllabus is a set of directions about what I think you need to do to learn the contents of this class. And that turned back towards recognizing ourselves as the authority figures who have to set a classroom set of conduct, the design of the assignments, the design of the assessments that helps our students learn, that gives them the experiences they can learn from, means that we can't get out from under that sense of, I am here because I know more about this subject than you do. And I've created a 10 or a 15-week list of experiences that I need you to walk yourself through so that you can know some of what I know. That's the deal. And any pretense of kind of we're all in this together, just I happen to be a little more talkative, whatever. What ChatGPT has done is it's really pressured us to say, no, I have a better idea about how you're going to learn in this class than you do. And if you're allowed to adopt your laziest or most easily distractible set of behaviors, you are just not going to get a lot out of the class. Mm-hmm. And the student reaction to this is variable along that different list of groups that I thought, but one of the facts of this kind of teaching is you always teach for the good ones. You teach for the students that show up. Everybody should get something out of your class, but the thing you're engaged with is the students are engaged with the material and with you. There have always been students like, I'm here because it's a core requirement or whatever. I would opt out if I could. I will give those students assignments. I will grade them. But the thing that gets you into the classroom, in the sense of like, I understand the environment I'm trying to create here, are the students who are leaning back towards the experiences you're creating. And that, this is a lot of work, this change. It's a drag. We all had syllabi that worked perfectly well right up to the end of November of 2022, and then they suddenly blew up. It's very disorienting. But ultimately, the teaching experience requires us to say to students, I have a better idea of the experiences you will learn from than you do, and I'm going to enforce them in this classroom, but you will benefit from that. And the students who are leaning into the material are responding positively to those changes because they can feel themselves learning more.
It's almost like you're arguing for reclaiming expertise. I feel nostalgic as well I went to school in the 90s and early 2000s at the University of Texas as an undergrad, and sometimes I feel nostalgic for that time period. And even further back, if you watch a movie like Paper Chase, you may have seen that movie. It's about Harvard Law School in the 1970s. And my mom actually went to Harvard Law School in the 1970s, and she would talk about that movie as well. And so it's a time capsule, and there is something kind of amazing about how harsh that professor is. I feel like that style of education has gone extinct. It doesn't exist anymore. It's this thing where everyone is in the hot seat. If you're not, he could call on you at any time. If you're not prepared, you will be ritualistically humiliated. But there is part of me that feels nostalgic for that, even though I didn't actually really experience that. It's interesting your point that you're making about how some students want rigor. They want to be told they can't use their phone. They want this. That's a really interesting point. So let me jump over to another thing and read a quote. A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog. You've probably heard this. Con a ship. That's right. Design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects.
Yep.
So along those lines, what do you think the ideal college graduate in the AI era looks like? What should they actually be able to do with and without the tools?
Yeah. So that Clark quote has resonated for years because in the American undergraduate model, there is that sense, we've expressed it much more inelegantly as distribution requirements, but like if you go to college, you should study some poetry and you should study some math. Students often don't like that. They often come in and say, look, I want to be a physicist. What am I doing reading literature, or vice versa? But we have pretty stubbornly clung to that model by saying part of this is doing stuff you're not necessarily good at or not necessarily motivated by. And there are every semester stories of students who come back and say, you know, I didn't think I was going to like X, but, and, you know, I think people often don't appreciate this in the American context, but the great glory of the American system of higher education is not expecting 18-year-olds to know what they want to do with their life. That's a big ask. And in many higher education systems, you slot yourself into what's essentially an employment track when you arrive at college. I am at the College of Engineering, and that is it. In an American system, if you say, you know, I'm in engineering, but I actually realize I want to be a biologist, no one is shocked. The answer is just, okay, fill out this form. And that exploratory range, I think, is a big part of what we expect a college student to be able to do, right? It's not just that you know something, you're good at something. It's that you can get good at new things, right? You can spin up on a new set of ideas, new set of tools, techniques, opportunities, whatever it is. You know, it's always been the case that kind of adaptability is good and useful. In the current disruption, which has many dimensions, economic, technological, political, so many things are changing at the same time. Being able to keep your balance during changing times is a more important skill than knowing how to do any one particular thing well. The tricky part of your question is, what should they be able to do with the tools and without? And I think about GPS a lot. If you use GPS, you can drop into a strange city and find your way from point A to point B like that. And also, you learn nothing about that city, right? And that effect is relatively obvious. What's less obvious is that as you rely on GPS, your human capabilities degrade. It isn't just that GPS makes you better at finding your way quickly. It's that if you lean on GPS over a long period of time, you yourself get worse at finding your way around if GPS is off. And that, I think, you know, with and without the tools is a really interesting question, because I think at least one thing students need to be able to do is decide, I'm going to turn off these tools. I'm not going to use it for this particular task or this particular job. It will be harder if I do it that way, but I will gain more. I will gain some understanding, right? It is easier to find your way around a city you've gotten lost in than a city you've only ever used GPS in. Mm-hmm. And the particular capabilities of the tools, I mean, they're astonishing, right? You can do an incredible range of things with them. One of the things I'm interested in right now is, can we give students more experience at producing a wider variety of outputs, right? In the sort of American college model, by and large, the lingua franca is the written word, right? Even chemists are writing lab reports, right? That the sort of written output is the thing you assume someone is able to do in any given class. Whereas image making audio, making video, working with data, working with visualizations, all of those are assumed to be relatively specialist tasks. Right. We now have in a world where people can have a conversation with a spreadsheet, right? I upload all the World Bank data on economic development in, you know, Central America, whatever. I now don't necessarily have to know SQL, the standard, you know, query language for structured data. I can just ask, right? Tell me about GDP development in Guatemala versus Ecuador. Give me a graph, you know, give me some, and I think we should be able to increase students' flexibility in the kinds of outputs they produce, right? That a student should be able to produce a description, have a conversation about something, but also should be able to say, I made a graph, I made a visualization, here's a video that illustrates this idea. Because the technical barriers to those different kinds of outputs to creating those different kinds of outputs have been lowered.
Absolutely.
But we still have to have an assessment regime where we know that the student has internalized and not just produced that material. And I think the way we get to that is the students just have to have regular experience of being in a conversation or having some kind of academic assessment, whether it's oral exams or blue books or whatever, where they don't use the tool, so that they're reminded you learn more about a city when you get lost than when you use GPS.
Occasionally exposing them without their tools, without their cybernetic equipment.
Right. And part of it is the sort of fire drill rationale, right? You know, on some day where you can't use the tool, you need to be ready. But the tools are getting more capable and more ubiquitously available, right? There were a bunch of people who are excited about, like, let's build a room where you turn off the internet. But of course, now that you've got DeepSeek and QWen and the really performant small models, it can be on your computer, it can be on your phone. AI is moving towards the body.
Right.
The much bigger rationale for working with that AI is just to have the experience of exercising, right? Many people have used the gym metaphor, right? If I sit all day, then I need to do something to keep from wasting away. That's as true of mental activity as it is of physical.
This idea of multimodal outputs, I think, is very interesting. The professor at Wharton, his name is escaping me. Thank you. Thank you. Exactly. In that book, he talks about raising the stakes for students. Instead of writing an essay, now you have to write a book. Instead of a short film, now you have to make a movie. I remember I floated that in a faculty meeting, and some colleagues of mine kind of shot that down as a bit ridiculous. And I kind of agree that conceptually it's interesting, but it's also impractical. But I like what you're saying. I think that it makes more sense, which is to say you have to create something more complicated that has more parts to it. Like if you have to create a video essay with an accompanying website, you really can't cheat your way through, quote unquote, cheat your way through that. Like it's just too easy to produce a text-based essay. But if you have all these different components and you have to produce artwork in Midjourney, and you have to produce video in Runway, and you have to create a website, and you have to create the text, and it all has to make sense and be coherent. Ultimately, you can get a lot of help from ChatGPT in terms of the strategy and ideas, but to execute that is just too difficult. It's going to take too long. There's no way around burning up a lot of brain cells to get it done,
I think that's right. And there's two different ways to approach that. One, the way that we all not we all, but many people sort of adopted in early 2023 was, well, we'll just figure out what these tools don't do well and we'll assign that, right? Use facts after 2021, ask for multimodal output, right? All that stuff, ask for personal anecdotes. Eventually the tools got good enough to produce those things as well. Yeah. So we couldn't outrun it in the long term, but it bought us time to adapt. But the other approach is you have to reflect on the work you're doing and on integration of these different video and Runway, generating some code to generate an output. That as long as the students are engaged in some mental effort that they will retain and remember, even if it is metacognition. I'm thinking about whether these things go together. I'm thinking about how the text and the video should inform one another. You can build an assignment around that. And I think the key difference between just trying to outrun the tool versus building an assignment around complex integration, we still need assessment practices that tell us whether the students have done that. And one of the messages I try to send to my faculty is we cannot just redesign our assignments and get out from under this. That there needs to be a way that what the students have actually learned is reflected in something the faculty member understands. And that, or faculty members in a large lecture class with section leaders or what have you. But the key thing is, whatever work you did, I have a way of knowing that it left something memorable for you. And I'll say particularly to Co-Intelligence, to Ethan's book, he just had a post 3-4 days ago, in which he's already rethinking that thesis, because he says the outputs of these things have gotten so complex and good that it's starting to be harder for me to see where I can participate, which is a really interesting change for him. Ethan has been the dean of, tool adoption in the academy since this thing dropped. He got on it immediately. His one useful thing blog posts have been probably the most widely read collection of observations about AI in the industry. And yet even he is already saying, yeah, this framework of just making the assignments complicated enough that only a human can do them, even he is saying that it's running out of steam. And I think that the way we get to the student got something out of the complex assignment, the student did the complex assignment, but the assessment wasn't just turning the assignment in. The assessment was demonstrating that the student had acquired some new capability.
How can universities kind of create and foster a culture where students see value in, let's say, the struggle in learning and putting in, the work and, going to libraries, looking for books, citing them, doing first-hand interviews, things like that. How can we foster that culture?
So that's a really good question. And in a way, that is the central question, because this is a cultural change more than it's a technological one. We're all selected, the faculty are selected for expertise in our subject, right? We're in front of the class because we know more about the history of physics or literature, whatever we're teaching. But that being selected for expertise makes us wary of saying to students, I don't know what's going on. This is an adaptive moment. These tools are new. I'm not completely familiar with, the range of options is just too large for any one person to understand it. And yet we have heard consistently from students that kind of honest talk in the classroom makes a big difference in their sense of alignment. We tried a year ago, we were recommending sort of a culture of transparency, right? If a student is using the tool, they should also acknowledge and say how they're using it and so on. And faculty members reported that many students wouldn't disclose use of the tools, even if it was this is low stakes, you're not being graded on this, I just want to know how you're using it. In part because they felt they were being surveilled, and in part because they felt if they characterized the way they were using the tool, the faculty member would recommend that they stop using it that way. And as long as we have a culture in which the students feel like they can get better work done if they don't tell us what's going on than if they do, none of the rest of the cultural change that you were just speculating about, Alessandra, will work. And if the students don't trust us to have that conversation with them, and in a way that says, that where the faculty member says, I'm not an expert on this, right? I'm someone who's familiar with this. I'm trying to create an environment in this classroom that you can learn from. Without that kind of conversation, a lot of the rest of that change is downstream. But the other thing I will say is, and again, if you read the sort of whatever widely in the 1,000-year history of universities, there has never been a university where all students are motivated by the love of learning. Just insane stories from the Middle Ages of people going to school and then not going to class and just carousing in the streets of Paris. And then suddenly, it comes time to graduate. And what do I do? This is an age-old problem. Our institutions have always been open to people who have multiple competing motivations. And there are students who are particularly scholastic, who gravitate towards the library as, the space that they've been waiting to be in their whole lives. And then there are students who think this is a utilitarian way for me to plug into a part of the adult world that I aspire to, right? And if we said, basically, we are only going to take the students who are pure of heart, it would be a phenomenal experience for the academics, and we would close in 3 semesters because our finances would implode, right? We are always going to have to deal with a variety of motivations in the classroom. So rather than saying, how can we make each student, motivated solely by the love of learning, I think we say, how can we make it so that it's the students understand that if they take the laziest option at every turn, they're not going to get through this. And it's daunting. Again, back to this, faculty don't like to think of themselves, at least in the American context, faculty don't like to think of themselves as the authority figure. To go and say to faculty, you are going to have to make it hard for your students to do bad work, and that's going to be a lot of effort on your part. That is nevertheless the job that we're currently stuck with, right? We are going to have to find ways to talk to our students and understand what they've learned that put them on the spot. I mean, Spencer was saying earlier about cold calling in that movie. We can do all kinds of things to instill the love of learning, but we can also do things that say, trust me on this. If you come to this class and have the experiences the syllabus is designed to deliver, you're going to know about this subject at the end of the semester. And dealing with that mixed set of motivations is really part of the job.
I feel like it comes back to assessment, and that's something that you do talk about in your New York Times piece, I believe. Maybe you could just circle back to that, and the idea being how to assess identity formation, if that is in fact the true goal of higher education. As Ethan Mollick called it, I believe at some point, we're experiencing the homework apocalypse. Like I don't know, I'm pretty sure he said that. Yeah. But ChatGPT.
No, that's exactly right. Okay. That's exactly right.
Because ChatGPT has, the way I see it, it's like in a video game terms, it's OP. It's overwhelmed assessment as we know it. So how do we rethink assessment and bring it back to, I hate to say first principles, but this concept of identity formation?
One thing I often quote is Herbert Simon, the great Carnegie Mellon. He played so many roles, but the great educational theorist at Carnegie Mellon, who said, learning happens as a result of what the student thinks and does, and only as a result of what the student thinks and does. And the minute you internalize that, a bunch of other stuff becomes really clear. Right? If you generated a great essay from my class and you didn't think or do anything, you haven't learned from it. I don't care how good the output is.
Yeah, exactly.
And the homework apocalypse, from my view, is the decoupling of writing the noun from writing the verb. If you can produce writing without doing writing, then all of a sudden, a distinction we never had to make before, then all of a sudden, we are left with a reminder, to your point about first principles. What I care about is what's in the student's brain, right? What I care about, or what the student is capable of. In some cases, there's also a physical element, if I'm teaching painting, for example. But what I care about is what the student has, what has changed about the student as a result of the assignment. And if the answer is, they got a little experience typing a prompt and they got a little experience cutting and pasting, but they already knew how to do those things, so there's really almost no change. Doesn't matter how good the output is. Does not matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Now, if the assignment is you're going to need to produce this kind of output when you go work in the world, right? My friends in comp sci say we have to teach the students the basics of computer programming. They need to know variables. They need to know control structures. They need to know sort of decision points in the program. But by the end, I have to teach them to use these tools or they won't get a job, right? So that's a field where there really is a crossover, where at some point you're saying we need them to understand the basics in order to just be computer scientists just to get into the basics of the field. But then we need to add the tools in order for them to get employed. Like that's an interesting model here. The question about identity formation is curious because it's not like it happens in any one class, right? It's very important that we're an institution, and that the degree is not given for a kind of linear addition of credits, right? That majors have structures, and there really is a sense of juniors doing something different than first years. No one of us is responsible for the identity formation, which is an interesting part of the institution. We are all, but anybody who looks back on their college career will understand that both the ladder of classes in a major, and maybe more importantly, the breadth of experiences that they have across a whole curriculum, add up to that without each of us being responsible for that.
Yeah.
So I think what to first principles, what faculty are responsible for in the class is, did the students have experiences they learned from? If the answer is no, it's a bad class. Doesn't matter how the answer is no, they could use the fanciest tools in the world. If the answer is they didn't learn anything because they didn't internalize anything, that's where we're back to first principles of the Herbert Simon observation. But again, if you get assessment practices right, if you say to students, at the end of this, I am going to know what you learned during the class because I'm going to ask you, or you're going to prove it to me in some way that doesn't treat your output as a proxy for your learning. Weirdly, that frees us up to assign AI use all over the place, because then we can say, yeah, use whatever tools you like, because at the end of this, I'm not looking at the output of the tools. I'm going to look you in the eyes and ask you a question. And I'm going to know if you answered or not. And I don't want to present this as being a panacea or not fraught with pitfalls. There's a risk that we get students who are really quick on their feet and have a good sounding answer, but actually aren't thinking as deeply as a student who would take a moment to compose their thoughts and answer in a more structured way. We have to be careful that we're not moving towards glibness as the new thing we're grading. So it's not like this is a perfect solution. Anyone who teaches, a large lecture class in organic chemistry cannot have a one-to-one conversation with their students. We have to rethink how we're doing sections. This is a big change. This is not, as I've been saying to faculty at NYU, AI is going to transform higher education, but it's going to take 40 semesters, not 4. Like this, we're in this for a while. And I think this sense of like, if we can figure out the assessment piece, it actually frees us up to do so much more, to be so much more flexible about the assignments. That gets us, I think, in a really good place, because if the first principles are tied to what did the student learn rather than what output did my class require, I can vary the syllabus all the time and still know that my students are getting something out of the class.
Are you going to write a book about this? I feel like
I don't know.
You've got plenty of material.
I mean, I will tell you, look, I wrote something about this. I mostly kept my mouth shut for a couple of years because we were all on the ground. So there's no way I'm getting out in front of this thing. Like I need enough experience to have something to say. I wrote something for the Chronicle of Higher Ed in April,
yes,
which is when the Times came and said, hey, would you write something for our education issue? And I had a fantastic editor at the Times. I was going to put a lot more sort of academic insidery stuff in there. And she's like, yeah, nobody cares about that. Like, just get rid of these 3 paragraphs. So the piece ended up so much better than what I would have written on my own. And it really hit because it was part of it's back to school, but it's also people are having this conversation right now.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was surprised at how widely it got forwarded around. And it did make me think like there may be something to this at longer length. The problem with the book, of course, is it you write it and then it doesn't come out until the next year. So I can't be in the sort of chasing recent update from OpenAI or whatever. But yeah, there is something here and I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I would love to read that. I would encourage you to do that because you have more than enough amazing material. And this has been very informative. and just an excellent conversation. So we want to thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the series. I'm actually really curious to hear sort of what else you all produce, because there is no one size fits all solution. So us talking to each other is the way we get through this. And I'm grateful for you all doing this, and thank you for the invite.
All right. That was a very interesting conversation with Clay Shirky of NYU. Mm-hmm. And we talked about so many interesting themes, including, as advertised, getting into his article on how we kind of need to go back to the Middle Ages in terms of instruction and assessment, talking about, in particular, with regard to the history department, I thought was very helpful. Mm-hmm. We are producing historians, not history papers.
Absolutely.
Right? And then he had other takes like that, where he talked about education is in the business of identity formation. Again, to remind ourselves, what is the point of all of this? Point of this kind of long 4-year degree process, not to get the degree, to get the job. I mean, that is one important outcome, but more importantly is this formation of your identity.
And people are actively choosing certain fields to specialize in, and that might be because of a motivation to get to a certain job position in the future, or pursue a certain path in research, or just to kind of be proficient and specialized in a certain program. So I think with the rise of AI in higher education, it's posing that risk of ethically having that knowledge, right? Because let's say someone pursues a degree in English literature, for instance, just use AI in and out throughout the 4 years. How does it really make you a professional in that field?
Yeah.
How did you retain your knowledge? And that goes back to Clay's point about the importance of not what you know, it's how you know it, and what are the skills that you've gained throughout that 4-year program, let's say, to be specialized in a certain field.
Yeah, exactly. ChatGPT has overwhelmed assessment, in other words, or at least the traditional model of assessment. Why? Because until now, and Clay talks about this in the interview, if you were to write a 5 or 10 or 25 page paper on a topic, unless you went out and hired somebody to write it for you, which is just kind of rare in the academy. Some people have always done that, but it's pretty rare. Mm-hmm. We can pretty much be sure that you know something about the topic. You can't get from no paper to a 25 page paper without learning something.
Absolutely.
But that is broken when LLMs can produce that more or less effortlessly.
Exactly.
Your ability to lightly edit and guide the LLM to that outcome is not what we're trying to assess.
Absolutely. And I think this transcends the parameters of education only, because then if you just used LLMs to, write your papers throughout the 4-year program and you do graduate, mm-hmm. After that, you're meant to, look for jobs, and the jobs that you're applying to are going to assume that you are specialized in that field.
Yeah.
Which then you'd go into that job not really knowing much about it, because you've just used LLMs for the majority of your time in higher education. Yeah. So what does that create in terms of ethics? And not just AI ethics, it just transcends AI and just goes beyond that, in my opinion.
Absolutely, I think you're right to think of it as an ethical crisis in that regard. It's just a crisis of what the academy was supposed to be doing and what the actual outcome was. And I think another place where he really touched it very precisely was when he said that the product of higher education, again, is changes in your long-term memory.
Absolutely.
That is true learning, is changes in your long-term memory, which only come from grinding it out with difficult subjects. And I think that's where the whole going back to the Middle Ages thing matters, because in the end, stripped away of technology, grappling with difficult subjects is how you form long-term memory changes.
Absolutely.
He talked about the history of the university, was another thing. and how that for, I think, 500 years, he said, of the history of the university, writing was not a thing. So it was an oral culture, whether it was, again, instruction or assessment, this ancient art of rhetoric.
Right.
And that writing, which defines a lot of the modern academy, he points out is actually a modern invention, similar to our guest Dr. Gibbs, who put the university, I think, in a kind of a longer view.
Right.
Historical relativism.
Right. And I think, it is definitely worth thinking about as not just, people who are on the other end as faculty or like senior leadership that are figuring out how to implement AI in their curricula, but also as students, if you're going to get a degree of some sort, what is it that you're trying to get out of that degree?
Yeah, it puts in sharp focus, again, what is the purpose of higher education? I think that's the most fascinating thing to really come out of the disruption of LLMs in education.
Absolutely.
And he mentions, finally, I think another very important point, which is that we want to create a culture where students want to learn. I think that is the most important thing.
Definitely.
Again, igniting curiosity, caring about a topic, and LLMs kind of short circuit that as well.
Yeah.
When used, shall we say, uncharitably, when used lazily, LLMs have incredible potential actually to accelerate and improve education in all these ways, in terms of personalized learning, in terms of just-in-time learning. But when you just try to push a button to get to the essay and do a little light editing to make it look like you didn't use ChatGPT, that is not a particularly, what's the word? It's not going to do a lot of wonders for your long-term memory development.
That's going to be a good kind of segue into our next episode, where we will be talking about the impact of LLMs on generating essays specifically, whether it's through LLMs, search engines, or just purely your very own brain, and what that does to you, neurologically speaking.
Previewing our interview with Natalia from MIT and her groundbreaking study on
very excited for that one.
Whether or not ChatGPT is rotting our brains.
Exactly. Stay tuned.
You didn't look at the camera for that,
I did.
Did you say stay tuned? Okay.
You can cut it out.